Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Aquarium of the Pacific's online academy. My name is Dana, and I'm a member of the education department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, coming to you live from Long Beach, California. Now, throughout this next half hour, we're going to be teaching a program all about fish. We're going to explore the basic characteristics. We're also going to be checking out some, basic fish. Just when you think fish, what do you picture? We're going to talk about some of those animals, and then we're going to explore some of the oddballs that might not look like your classic fish. So if that sounds like something you're interested in learning a little bit more about, go ahead and join us throughout this program. We'd love to have you participate. Now, in just a moment, you're going to see a phone number right down here. There you go. Look at that. It's like we work together and do this every day. So this is our phone number, and we'd love for you to text us any of your questions or observations throughout this next half hour at 562-286-1838. Now, if you find yourselves watching this video after our live stream, right now it is 2 o'clock on Tuesday, June 9th. So if it's 3 o'clock on Tuesday, June 9th, go ahead and email us at live@lbaop.org. Now, we're going to be manning this text line throughout the program, but after that, we'll go ahead and get to your answer as soon as we can, but it might take a little bit for us to get to that email address. Now, make sure that you remember texting rates do apply, and if you're one of our younger viewers, check and make sure you have adult permission before joining in and texting us today. Otherwise, let's sit back, relax, and start learning a little bit more about fish. We're going to discover as much as possible in the next 30 minutes, and it's all going to be based on you and your observations and your questions and anything that we might show on the screen here. Now, I'm joined in the studio today by a lot of my friends. We're so excited to have such a great team today. We have James and Sarah, who's going to be controlling what goes on behind me. Like that. Look at that transition. And then I also have Cynthia and Jen in the studio taking your questions and passing them in towards me. So there's going to be a lot of give and take throughout this program. And again, we'd love to have you join us. So this behind me, whoa, it looks kind of interesting right now. Like the light must be in the perfect angle to just make it this kind of like, ooh, eerie. This is our Honda Blue Cavern exhibit. And our Blue Cavern exhibit is modeled after a real dive site here in Southern California. It's modeled after Blue Cavern, which would make sense, which is a dive site at Catalina Island, about 22 to 26, depending where you're coming from, miles off of the coastline here. So let's take a look at some of the animals that call this exhibit home. What do you notice? What makes a fish that might be hanging out in this kelp forest habitat right here? Like those right there. So what do you see? Well, there's a lot of water, and so fish typically have gills. It's something that helps them breathe underwater. They don't have lungs like you and I because we breathe air. However, both us and fish need oxygen, and so our lungs pull the oxygen from the air. Air is actually only about 21% oxygen. And then our fish, their gills pull the oxygen from the water. So we both take in oxygen, them with gills, us with lungs. What else do you notice? Their movements. Great observation. So I have arms and legs, right? Everyone in the studio has arms and legs. Do you have arms and legs? Okay, just checking. I'm just checking. Now, our fish, like that one that just went by, they don't have arms and legs. What do they have instead? Well, fish typically have fins. Right? So the appendages that come off of their body are going to help them move through water a little bit better. Now, as a swimmer, I like to think I'm really good at moving through water, but if I were to go up against a fast fish, probably wouldn't be doing so well. So watch how this animal right here uses its fin to move across the screen. I know it's a little muted, so it's kind of hard to see, but you can see them moving that back fin there. Now, sometimes fish will move with the pectoral fins, which are these two fins, I was going to say arms, right here. And some fish move with their caudal fin, which is what we would consider the tail. So it just depends on the fish and what kind of movement they do. So watch this. That's going to be with the caudal or the tail fin. Okay. Beautiful. All right. So fish have gills to help breathe. Fish have fins to move through that aquatic environment. What else do fish have? Something that you can't really see, but is very important for fish. This animal right here has a backbone, right? They have a skeleton system, just like you and I, as does that one, as does this one. So this is actually one of my favorite local fish. This is a California sheephead. But in order to be a fish, we classify them as vertebrates, which means they have a backbone. So go ahead and feel your spine behind you. Is it there? All right, good. Now, that backbone is what gives us support and gives us structure. And it does the same thing for these fish right here. I'm actually going to show you the skeleton of a fish. Check it out. Now, this one is obviously, I'll hold it kind of underneath so you can see it a little bit. This one is obviously smaller than our sheephead, right? This is not like life size, but it's pretty close. Actually, let's go check this out on the document camera. Come on over here with me. So we'll be there in just one moment. We're going to check out what this looks like. Aha. Ooh, we're a little zoomed in. Dun, 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 dun. All right. See if we can adjust the lighting for you. Get it as good as possible. Oh my gosh, look at that. That looks beautiful. Okay, so there, right there, that's actually the backbone of the fish. So it kind of runs through the center, right? This is going to be the dorsal fin coming off the top. We have the caudal fin right over here, and then other fins around its body. This would be the head. Fun fact, if learning about this is so interesting to you and you want to discover more, maybe even make a career out of it, if you would go to a university or college, you'd take an ichthyology course. It's a big word, but it means the study of fish. And a lot of ichthyology classes will make you take the skull of a fish apart and then put it all back together. And I will tell you what, it might look like one solid skull right here, but there are a lot of different bones. Okay, who knew? And so fish skeletons are really complex, even though looking from the outside, the animal itself is fairly simple. So with that in mind, take one last look at our beautiful skeleton here, right? Again, backbone, we've got ribs, okay, all the way down to the tail. We're going to go back to our blue cavern exhibit, and we're going to take a look and kind of imagine these fish right here with that skeleton within it. Okay, so that's kind of your classic fish. A lot of the fish seen in Blue Cavern are like, yes, that's a fish, right? That's exactly what you picture. And then we're going to talk about a couple that we might think of, that we might have experience with, like one blue Palate Tang, which we'll check out here in a moment. Other ones are going to be the Garibaldi. Another one might be a giant sea bass. So we're going to explore those three. Ooh, and the Yellowtail or fin. I'm not sure. It depends what picture we pull up. Then we're going to check out some weird ones, right? So I'm going to let Sarah choose what fish comes up on the screen next. We're going to talk about one of those kind of classics. There we go, right here. This one right here, this is a Garibaldi. Now, a lot of people see this picture and they go, oh, cool, a goldfish. And you're not wrong. It is gold, well, orange, and it's a fish, right? Now, this is actually called the Garibaldi. The Garibaldi is the California state marine fish. And so what I love about this animal is these bright blue eyes that they have, right? The rest of the fish is very orange, but it's got that classic fish look to it, right? So it's got an eyes, mouth, it has an operculum. That's this part of the fish right here. And that's like a bony plate cover that covers their gills. We talked about those characteristic gills. It's got fins all around its body. This one has a very unique heart-shaped tail, right? It's kind of beautiful. And then the bright coloration of this fish tells us a little bit more about it. Garibaldi tend to be very, very territorial. In fact, so much so that I've been chased off by a Garibaldi. Now, I know on the screen it looks really big. It's really only like this big. But they really want to protect their area. So this bright coloration is kind of a warning color to say, hey, back off, this spot's mine. All right. So our Garibaldi, a very classic fish. Let's check out another one. Another local favorite. This right here is our giant sea bass. Now, this is actually fairly life-size. This animal can grow to be over 5 feet in length and over 500 pounds, and they're found right here off of the Southern California coastline, found kind of along the fringes of the kelp forest, sometimes right in the middle of the kelp forest. I've also seen them over sandy bottoms, and they're a real treat for divers to see, and that's because the population of this animal actually dropped a lot because they're so big. They're very curious animals. They'll come right up to divers to say hello and check you out, and because of that, they were an easy target for spear fishermen and fishermen in general. And so their population really started to drop. However, we've protected these animals, and we've now seen those populations start to climb back up, and it's becoming a little bit more common to see them on a dive. So we're very lucky. But again, looking at the, oh, what a baby. Looking at the baby, right? This is a baby giant sea bass. You can tell it's a little bit different. It's got that bright color, kind of like the Garibaldi, and it's got polka dots all over it, right? But it does still have that classic fish shape, just like its adult that we saw a moment ago. So it's got the eyes, the mouth is over here. It's got the fins. It's got the body right here that the skeleton would run through. Cool thing about the babies is their fins are kind of see-through, right? Excuse me. Let's jump back to that adult real quick. Let's see. So this part right here, do you see this curve right here? So that's the operculum I was talking about. That's the bony plate cover that would open right over the gills of that fish. So characteristic, right? It's got gills. It's got fins. It's got that long fish shape that we tend to think of. Now we're going to throw one more classic fish up on the screen here. And that's going to be, we have a question that's about this. I love that. So this question was, have you encountered a giant sea bass? I have. And it's so fun to encounter one of these animals in the natural habitat because, like I said, they're very curious fish. Now, we do have a handful of them here at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and oftentimes guests will see divers in the water in one of our exhibits, and they'll see the giant sea bass come right up to it. And usually they'll go, well, yeah, that makes sense. They're in an aquarium, and so, the divers bring them food. They must be just used to people in there. But that's the exact same behavior that I've experienced out in the ocean. Like I said, they're very curious. And so I've been on a dive where I actually had to get out of the way of the giant sea bass that was coming towards me because they just did not care. They were like, I'm going to come check out what you are, and hopefully you'll get out of my way, right? So giant sea bass, they're really, really special encounters out there. And like I said, we're starting to see them a little bit more and more. And so that's always exciting for divers. So great. Thanks for your question. We would love to have more and more questions. Again, that phone number is 562-286-1838. Go ahead and text us what you want to know, right? The more questions you ask, the more we can discover together. All right. So we're going to go to one last fish. I lied. We're going to go to two more fish. So this is our Palate Tang, our blue Palate Tang. Now, a lot of you will probably look at this fish and go, yes, that is a fish. That is Dory. I know that animal. I have a lot of experience with it, right? And yeah, this is a really characteristic fish. It's actually known as the blue Palate Tang, okay? So mouth, eyes. This is the operculum right here. Kind of hard to see, right? And that's going to cover the gills. Fins, fins, fins. Now, let's go ahead and watch that video one more time. So we'll jump back into the studio and we have to kind of reset the video here for a moment. But once it comes back to play, I want you to pay attention to what fins this animal is moving with, okay? Let's check it out. All right, 1 second. We're going to try to reset that video. All right. So, like I said, go ahead and keep an eye on what fins it's going to move with. It sounds like we're figuring it out right here. So we're back in the studio. Drum roll. Boom. There you go. All right. So it's kind of moving with both, but if you really watch, it's using this pectoral fin a lot. Now, what's special about Dory that a lot of people don't know about is actually the defense that this fish might have. And so our Palate Tangs are in a group of fish known as the surgeon fish. And the reason they're called surgeon fish is because just like a surgeon in an operating room who might have a really sharp scalpel, surgeon fish have the same thing. It's actually found right here, okay? It's a little scalpel, very sharp part of their body that can come out. And they use that for defense. If they hit you too strong with it or hit their predator too strong with it, it can actually leave a mark. It can make a cut. So again, a classic fish that we all tend to have a lot of experience or at least reference for. Now, one last one. All right. I know I got ahead of myself last time, but boom, what is that? All right, raise your hand if you like seafood. There's a lot of hands in the air. I lied. I don't like seafood. But there were other hands in the air. So this right here is a classic seafood item. This is actually a yellowtail, okay? And so yellowtail are a very, very classic fish when you think of that fish shape. Long, elongated body, eye, mouth, fins, boop, and the operculum is right here, okay? So that's that hard, bony plate covering that's going to be protecting their gills. So we've looked at some classics, all right? We understand what a fish looks like. We're going to jump back to the studio here, and then we're going to answer a couple questions you have, and then we'll move on to some of those oddballs I was talking about before. Now, Jax wants to know, how many types of groupers are there? There's a lot. So groupers are really, really large fish, similar to our giant sea bass that we were looking at earlier, and there are over 150 species. Now, we're actually going to be going into our tropical gallery here, where we'll get a look, hopefully, at our Queensland Grouper, who's going to be moving around, typically very slow in the center of the screen, maybe off to that side, I think. That side? All right, so that side. So we'll keep an eye out. We'll see what this fish is doing right now. But while we're making observations in this exhibit, again, the lighting's a little funny, so it kind of is hard to see. But this is actually the fish that I wanted to highlight right there. So keep an eye out for the grouper. Like I said, it's a really, really big one. But what was up with that fish right in the center? Okay, it's kind of silhouetted right now, which is perfect, because something that I'm noticing about that animal is it's got a really funny looking horn. If you were to name that fish, or that fish, or that fish, oh, they're everywhere right now. What would you call that fish? Someone said a hornfish. Not wrong. I like it. What else? Aha. There it is. So this animal right here is actually known as a unicorn fish. All right. And so unicorn fish have that really funny appendage coming right off the top of their head. Now, not all unicorn fish have that, but it's a characteristic of that group of animals. And what's fun about these animals is they have a fairly classic fish shape, but then that weird little horn comes off and just throws the whole thing off. But they are also, just like our blue palate tang, a part of the surgeonfish family. And so, just like our blue palate tang, what does that unicorn fish have to defend itself? A lot of times people will say, well, they have the horn and they must fight. Well, that's not true. Instead, they have that scalpel, like I mentioned, on the back of their tail. So they use that for the main line of defense. So there's another one right in the center here. Check it out. Right now that I say it's a unicorn fish, you're like, oh, yes, that looks like a unicorn, right? However, it's under the sea. So that was a really great example of you're almost a fish, a normal looking fish, but you have this funny thing that we don't fully understand. What other ones do we have? We're going to go check out some other pictures, talk about some other oddballs. Some fish have different colors. Some fish have different shapes, like even just something that simple, right? We got to see the unicorn fish that had that very unique shaped head. What about, Sarah, I asked for fish. She said, I don't know. Well, apparently that's a fish, right? But that's not like all the other normal fish we've been looking at. So let's learn a little bit more about this animal right here. So this fish here, yes, it is a fish. This is called the Grunt Sculpin. Now, before we really dive into it, let's see if we can explore the body a little bit and discover those main characteristics that we talked about. So if you take a look here, we've got the eye. It blends in, but that's the eye, okay? We've got the mouth coming right in towards my head. We've got a fin. I mean, that's a fin, right? And that's a tail over here. What about the operculum to cover the gills? Do you see it? That's right. Right here is going to be the operculum. That's going to be covering the gills, okay? But what about the rest of it? It's just got this kind of like little squat body, all right? Now, believe it or not, these funny looking things down here, those are actually fins. Now, Grunt Sculpin, they have their fins adjusted. Instead of having the fins on the side like this, kind of go like this. And they have these funny looking fingers coming out, but those are their fins, and they use them to walk around, okay? You didn't know you were joining me for moving and grooving now, did you? All right. So that's how that animal's going to move. Now, this animal likes to feed on small crustaceans and little things living in the sand. But even though it might not look like your average fish, that is a fish. It has those same characteristics. It even has that backbone going through the body. All right. Let's pull up another fun one. Oh, while we're waiting, actually, Carter has a question. Are there any fish along California beaches that are dangerous? Carter, that's a really great question. And while there's a lot of fish that are dangerous, if you're a fish, right? So fish typically eat each other. So depending on who you ask, right? If I was asking the Garibaldi, they might say there's a lot more dangerous fish than if you were asked me. As far as dangerous goes, there are definitely some fish that you might want to avoid. We have an animal called a scorpion fish here off the coast of California, and they have venom in their spines. Okay, so their spines are, and their dorsal fin kind of goes up and it's sharp like that. And if you were to touch one, here you go. No, Mr. Grumpy Gills. But these spines on top can go, right? And also I believe on the side here, on their operculum, they have a little spot that you want to avoid. But if I were to accidentally touch this, because like if I'm just going on a snorkel or a scuba dive and I'm not paying any attention, which you really should not be doing when you're in the ocean, this kind of blends into the rocks, right? It's not like that flashy, bright Garibaldi that we looked at earlier. Instead, our scorpion fish is much more camouflaged with the environment. And so I would say if I'm out in the ocean, this is kind of one that I'm paying attention for, mostly because I have to pay attention for it, right? But I'm sure there's a lot of other animals out in the ocean that we should respect their distance. Now, Jax wants to know how many fish are in Blue Cavern. Well, let's put it back on the screen and we can count together. I'm just kidding. In Blue Cavern right now, how many would you guess? A couple hundred? Okay, so we have a big school of sardines in there, which can fluctuate up into the thousands. So if we were to not count the sardines, we'd say probably over 100 or so, right around there. With the sardines, a lot more. All right, so great questions, everyone. We're going to jump back to check out some of our unique fish, like this one right here. Does anybody recognize this fish? Have you heard anything about it before? Well, this animal right here is called a lionfish. And just looking at it at first, it's like, whoa, there is a lot going on, right? What can we discover about this fish just by looking at it? First of all, are we sure it's a fish? Okay, let's look for those main characteristics. They've got eyes, mouth. I'm guessing there's a backbone in here somewhere, right? What about that operculum? Do you see it? That gill covering. Right here. So this spot right here is the operculum. That's going to cover their gills. But what about all this other stuff around the body of this animal? What do you think those might be? Yeah, those are the fins. Good job. So the fins on this, you can see it's actually broken down. It's got spines and rays. And instead of, again, tucking in like this, it's kind of like that Grunt Sculpin in the fact that it's like, it's got all this, right? Right here. And so this fish uses these as a defense. Similar to that Garibaldi, the coloration of this fish, it's kind of bright and flashy, right? It's a warning sign. So this fish can be very venomous. You want to make sure that you're avoiding it, right? But the kind of fun fact about this animal here is it's also an invasive species. Now, what does that mean exactly? We talked about some conservation earlier when we were talking about our giant sea bass. We talked about the fact that we overfished it. I didn't use that word, but I explained that they were an easy target and we took a lot of them and their population started to drop. That's overfishing. Fishing so much that the population of the fish can't keep up. Now, a different kind of story of conservation and challenges when we're dealing with our oceans is invasive species, something like this. And an invasive species is kind of just like it sounds like. It means that a species that does not belong in a certain habitat shows up. It's either introduced or is displaced and shows up in that area. And it starts to actually outcompete the animals that typically live there. And so lionfish like this were... a lot of people will keep them in home aquariums, and then they can get to be a little bit much. And so we noticed that people were starting to release them into the natural habitat, but they'd be releasing them in areas that they didn't belong. And when you introduce an animal to a habitat that it's not normally found, it usually means there's not a lot of predators that naturally go after and eat that animal. And so the population for this fish, unlike that giant sea bass, it started to go crazy. There were too many of them. And when you have too much of one species, it starts to take advantage of that habitat and other animals can't find food, can't find a place to live. And so this was a really upsetting story to watch the habitat be affected by this animal. There are projects in place to kind of mitigate the invasive species work. This is something seen in all habitats around the world. So if that's something that interests you, I encourage you to learn a little bit more about invasive species and how they can drastically affect their habitat. Now, Jonathan wants to know, What happens if you get stung by a scorpion fish? And I would imagine by a lionfish as well, because they can do that. And the answer is, I've never done it, so that's good. But it's just like getting stung by a bee in the sense that it can get red, it can get swollen, it hurts a little bit, right? And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to touch one of these. You don't want to touch one of those, right? Great question, Jonathan. So we've talked about some normal fish, right? We've talked about the fish characteristics. Then we've talked about our Garibaldi, our Palate Tang, our giant sea bass. We checked out our Yellowtail. What else did we look at? We looked at one more that I'm forgetting. Maybe not. Then we got to explore some of our oddballs. We've talked about the Grunt Sculpin. We explored the Lionfish. We looked at we even saw the scorpion fish. Let's throw up one of my favorites. It's called a triggerfish, okay? Now, Sarah's going to look for it on the computer here for a moment. She's going to pull up a photo of a triggerfish. But when I just say the word triggerfish, what do you picture? What comes to mind? A triggerfish. Well, not that, right? So that's a really beautiful animal right there. Now, it's got some really cool characteristics that we can talk about. But first, let's break down the fact that it is, in fact, a fish. What do you see? What do you recognize? Ah, Sarah says she recognizes fins. Yeah, totally. It's got fins all over its body. What else? It's got an eye. It's got a mouth. Do you see that hard covering, that gill protector, the operculum? It's kind of hard to see, but it would be right in this area, okay? Now, what about the color of this fish? What's going on? Do you think it was dark when it got dressed? Could be. Now, this is usually something that, believe it or not, helps the animal camouflage. This is a disruptive color pattern. And so when you're looking for like a fish, you're looking for the entire outline of a fish, okay? So let's see, I do not have a whiteboard easy access. Let me grab this. And there we go. All right, we're on to something here. So when you're looking for a fish, you are looking for something that is like pretty concrete, right? A fish. Just a general fish. Now, what happens if there's a lot of busy stuff in the background, like a coral reef maybe? And there's stuff all over the place. Okay, but I can still see my fish. Ooh, but what happens if my fish has like different colors on it? It's starting to get a little bit harder, especially if there's like other colors around it. Right? What happens if it's broken up? If that if that normal fish body is broken up, typically blends into the habitat a little bit more. So, take a look at this. Now that you know what a disruptive color pattern is, this animal right there fits that description pretty well. And so it breaks up that general body of a fish. But enough about color. You're like, Dana, you called it a triggerfish. What is that? Well, this fish has a really great adaptation. And an adaptation is something that helps it survive. And that's going to be right up here. Do you see it? No? Oh, okay. So a triggerfish has a little extra spine right here that lays down flat on their... How can I do this? Flat, like that. And then it goes... Boop, and it's got a little spine that sticks right up. And there's a couple things that triggerfish can do with that. One, it acts as defense, right? If I'm biting that fish and I get stabbed in the roof of the mouth, that's not going to feel good. Now, when I say I mean a predator, not me, because I don't like seafood. They can also wedge into rocks and use that trigger to stick them into small caverns, okay? And so just looking at this fish, you're like, wow, really bright and colorful. But then you learn that it has that extra little whoop, and it's a great defense mechanism. So, another oddball, a beautiful oddball, right? Let's go ahead and head back to the studio and do a quick recap here. So, once again, we talked about the fish characteristics. Fish all have a backbone. They're all vertebrates. Fish have gills. Fish have fins. Fish have ways to breathe underwater and move through water. That's a pretty important part, right? But then when you start to look at a lot of those weird fish, you'll notice that they all have different appendages, or their fins that are used for swimming are actually used for walking, like the sculpin, right? All sorts of amazing things that can make a fish into something a little bit more intense. So if you learned anything in this program and you're like, wow, I want to discover more about some weird fish, you could be exploring for the rest of your life. There's so much to discover about the oddballs in our ocean, and I highly encourage you to do so. Now, we are wrapping up in the studio today, but we'll be back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to talk about 1, 2, 3, counting in the sea. So that's going to be all about learning how to count and recognize numbers, as well as learning a little bit about our sea animals. So if you have some little ones at home, come back and join us at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for hanging out with us today. Have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.